Hello everyone, today we're reading Paola Santiago and the River of Tears by Taylor K. Mejia. We are in chapter 23. Chapter 23 is on page 257. The title of chapter 23 is Even Bigger Dragon Lizard Dogs. I'll give you a second. How many pages is this? It's not too long. Okay. Ready? They made slow progress across the fields to the palace, doing their best to move in absolute silence. Well, Pau did her best. Bruto, on the other hand, seemed determined to whimper and whine and bark at everything that moved. Eventually, she stopped trying to keep him quiet. He was a void beast, after all. Hopefully the others wouldn't consider his presence out of the ordinary. Pau kept her knife at the ready and the shopping bag with the tiny bit of remaining Florida water under her arm, even though she was sure the latter wouldn't be of much use to them here. The bag reminded her of Senora Mata, and to distract herself from the terrifying task she was trying to accomplish, Pau thought back to the fateful morning a few days ago when she tried to convince Dante to come with her to go looking for a kidnapper. If only she'd known that the kidnapper in question was immortal Niño de la Luz in search of the very key she'd just used to cross the barrier into the magical world. She would have laughed if even the slightest sound wouldn't have brought a horde of angry fantasy creatures down on her. That almost made her laugh too. Pau had been a scientist, a girl who believed equations and hypotheses and the accepted rules and physical limitations of the universe. A girl who'd rolled her eyes at her mom when she told stories of wizards taking third daughters for wives and dog lizards that prowled the desert and wailing women who searched for their drowned children night after night. What were the odds that Pau, of all people, would end up in some twisted version of one of the stories? If Dante were here, he'd understand, she thought, but Dante was gone, and so was Emma. Pau was on her own. She suddenly didn't feel much like laughing anymore. The palace still seemed so far off. They'd barely moved a fraction of the way across as the dark minefield of murderous creatures, and even over that little distance, it was a miracle they hadn't been attacked yet. What would the creatures do to them in here? Were the rules different now that they were through the rift? Would Bruto be safe since he was one of them? Or would they consider him a traitor for helping her? I hope they don't smell the starburst on your breath, she mumbled to him as they moved from a fallen pillar to a pile of loose bricks. As the train stretched on, there were fewer things to hide behind. They'd have to be even more careful. Miraculously, that through a combination of very quiet footsteps and a little breathing, they made it to the halfway point. There were so many monsters behind as in front of them, Pau thought, though she wasn't sure if that was comforting or not. They wedged themselves behind yet another stone something or other. This one might have been the ruins of a wall, and Pau wondered what had stood there before, what this sinister glass structure had replaced. Pau could see things more clearly from here, in the place's weird green glow. Unfortunately, up ahead, the courtyard was wide open. The ruins had been removed closer to the center, and she spotted more monsters than ever. Even worse, there appeared to be some kind of moat surrounding the palace, and from what Pau could tell, it was spanned only by a single bridge, guarded by two giant horned beasts she'd never seen before, not even the most comprehensive of her mom's bestiary books. How are we going to get across that? Pau whispered, and Bruto sniffed sympathetically. A few feet to the left of their hiding place, a chupacabra the size of a small horse snorted and licked his lips as if it were to prove that it would be impossible. A dozen twisted trees dotted the landscape between them and the moat. Pau didn't think they were large enough to hide even Bruto, but they were the best hopes of cover they had for now. Their only hope. Between the giant chupacabra to their left and a horrible swarm of manos pochanos, Pau spotted the right. There was one very straight, very narrow path to a place where three trees sort of clumped together. They'd make for that. Pao decided, trying hard not to feel like she was on a playground slide, hurtling toward a landing pad that was on fire. She took a deep breath, getting ready to run more silently than ever. When green lightning struck the ground between the trees and the bridge, a black hole appeared in the dome ceiling, just big enough for 3 living people and 4 ahogados to drop through. Pao's heart leaped into her throat. The void had opened again, and there were real, actual, breathing people inside. She wasn't alone anymore. If she could get to them, free them from their captors, maybe as a group they'd have a better chance of getting inside the palace, of getting Emma back, of finding... Let them go! The voice was loud, too loud, and its familiarity punched Pao in the gut. In the palace's glow, Pao saw a boy-shaped shadow sprinting across the courtyard toward the new arrivals. Let them go, or I swear to God I'll vaporize every last one of you! No, Pao said, forgetting to be quiet. Bruto nipping her ankle as a reminder, but it didn't matter. Every creature in the vicinity, maybe the whole field, was looking at the tall, broad-shouldered boy who had decided to make a spectacle of himself in order to save others, even though he was hopelessly outnumbered by enemies. Only one boy in the world, any world, would be that stupid. Pao felt tears stinging her eyes as a club came into view, green light reflecting off the streaks of pearl as the boy swung it, shattering 3 ahogado heads in one swipe before turning to face the 4th. From the palace, the siren wailed again, and now that she was closer, Pao could see the source of the searchlight. At the top, a bulb of poisonous green light was now scanning the ground for the source of the commotion. Time slowed, the danger receding as all the memories came flooding back. All the thoughts Pao had repressed just to enable herself to keep putting one foot in front of the other. All the things she thought she'd lost forever. Dante telling her he liked her algae when they were saying goodnight. Dante losing at video games and trying to be a good sport. He'd taken her hand when the world was ending. He had brought his alma de alma to life by trying to protect her. He'd kissed her on the cheek. And he was alive and fighting. I got a little confused. I'm going to go back to the last paragraph on page 260. From the palace, the siren wailed again, and now that she was closer, Pao could see the source of the searchlight. At the top, a bulb of poisonous green light was now scanning the ground for the source of the commotion. Time slowed. The danger receding as all the memories came flooding back. All the thoughts Pao had repressed just to enable herself to keep putting one foot in front of the other. All the things she thought she'd lost forever. Dante telling her he liked her algae. When they were saying goodnight. Dante losing at video games and trying to be a good sport. He'd taken her hand when the world was ending. He'd brought his alma de alma to life by trying to protect her. He'd kissed her on the cheek, and he was alive and fighting. The ribbons of green light were still sweeping the fields, searching for him as growls and hisses and screeches kicked up like wind around them. The monsters were reacting to the presence of the shouting boy as he splintered at the last ahogado and turned to face the next foe. Maybe it was the fact that she had almost lost him and she couldn't lose him again. Maybe it was his bravery to the point of stupidity, pheromones changing the chemistry of the air in the bubble. Maybe Pao was just tired of tiptoeing around. Whatever it was, she didn't hesitate. She didn't overthink. She just used the commotion and the distraction he was causing, and she ran toward him, leaving the shopping bag behind. No longer worried about moving quietly, Pao found the magic dense atmosphere surprisingly satisfying to sprint through. It snapped and sizzled around her. She flew through the air, and it seemed to take her only seconds to reach the clump of twisted trees. Only one more dash like that, she'd reach the palace. Bruto caught up to her just as she was squeezing between the trees. She knew she would stop and make herself at home in the cozy little space while she planned her next move, but she didn't. Instead, she drew her knife and did the exact thing she wanted to throttle Dante for more than once since this whole mess had started. She acted brave to the point of stupidity. "Over here, you ugly dog!" Pao shouted at a medium-sized chupacabra approaching Dante too fast from behind. The 3 children who had come through were helpless, huddled together at the foot of a pillar as Dante fought to save them. Unfortunately for him, the searchlights found them all at just that moment. Bathed in almost blinding green light, Pao didn't panic. Instead, she remembered Naomi's technique, and baseball slid into the monster's back legs, taking it out with her dusty sneakers before slitting its throat with her knife. She hoped Bruto hadn't seen that. Pao? Pao? Came Dante's voice, disbelieving, full of hope and fear and 1,000 other emotions. Didn't think I was going to let you get all the glory again, did you? She asked, throwing off her fallen assailant as a cloud of green-eyed bats dive-bombed her. She ducked, rolled, and came up right beside him, her heart full even as it pounded in borderline terror. How did you... You were supposed to stay at camp, and what happened to your hair? Pao could see the end of her one white braid out of the corner of her eyes as she pivoted to avoid a mano pachano skittering toward her ankles. It's a long story. How did you get here? And why aren't you... Pao, watch out! Dante yelled, charging toward her with his club outstretched. She didn't see the danger, but she understood just in time as Bruto approached. No! She shouted, swinging around to protect the confused pup. I know he's little, but he's still one of them, Dante said, a grim look on his face. He's a long story too, Pao said, scooping him up and letting him lick her face. But keep your fancy weapon away from him, hero boy. Dante looked like he wanted to argue, but then Bruto's black tongue flopped out of his mouth in a smiley way. Dante rolled his eyes, flexing his shoulders as he turned to face whatever was coming next. I know you're desperate for a puppy, but geez, Pao, isn't this... But what Dante thought it was, she never found out. Another ahogado had been lurking nearby, and it chose that moment to strike. Dante swung its club, and Pao jumped out of the way as it connected. Unfortunately, she landed facing the bridge, and what she saw there froze her in her tracks. Oh no, Pao said. It wasn't just the ahogado she hadn't seen coming. Heading across the bridge in a slow, almost processional march were the two horned beasts. At first, they seemed ram-like, but as they got closer, Pao saw that they were chupacabras too. Massive, ancient ones whose scales had overtaken most of their bodies. The green protrusions along their backs had grown long, wrapped around their ears and calcified so they looked like horns. Their eyes were green, Pao noticed as they drew closer, but not the same bright, toxic shade of the other creatures. This was the milky green of a jade, like the stones her mom put on altars for luck and friendship. Around them, all the void beasts, including Bruto, went still. Even they seemed cowed in the presence of these chupacabra elders, which, Pao realized, were about the size of those big horses with furry legs. She could never remember the name of that breed. Dante came over to Pao and stood so close their shoulders almost touched. The way the chupacabras walked was peaceful, regal, even. Pao knew Dante was thinking the same thing she was. Attacking these creatures would be wrong unless they attacked first. Together, they hoped for the best, even as they expected the worst. Sorry I couldn't, Pao said at the same time Dante said, sorry I didn't. They laughed together, a strange sound in the desolate landscape. Pao bumped Dante's shoulder with her own, feeling curiously light considering what was approaching. They were together again, she thought, and so far they had made it through everything else this crazy week had thrown at them. Why not this? It's okay, she said as a chill settled around them, shadows trailing the massive ancient creatures like cloaks. I'm all about forgiveness these days. You, Dante asked, raising one eyebrow, not daring to look away from the chupacabras. Pao shrugged, but her light feeling evaporated quickly as she craned her neck to meet the eyes of the fantastic creatures. They stopped before Pao, and Dante surveying them impassively. What do we... Dante whispered, but Pao elbowed him with the arm that was not holding an immobile Bruto. She didn't know why, but she felt it would be the best for them to stay as quiet and still as possible, too. The chupacabras in the field had been more dog than lizard, but these two were almost dragon-like. Their scales glimmered a pale green, and their few remaining patches of coarse hair were pure white. Their faces were scaly, too, with reptilian noses, and the calcified protrusions were even more majestic up close, like crowns. Put the club away, she whispered to Dante. The part of her that had felt welcomed by the rift was telling her that showing any kind of aggression toward these creatures was a line they shouldn't cross. She had an almost reverent feeling, like she wanted to kneel or make an offering as ridiculous as she knew that was. But before she had a chance to freak out, Dante even more, something detached from the top of one of the beasts and slid neatly to the ground. Well, 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 said Ondina, straightening her dress and approaching Pao. Took you long enough? And that is the end of chapter 12.